Hey everybody, it's me, your buddy Dave, the host here at the Dark Stuff channel on YouTube. Thanks a lot for checking out my latest video. So this week I am reposting with revised audio my 2014 interview with St. Vincent. I have now made it louder. I've included a little bit more of the interview in there than was included the first time. I have also removed the lengthy, some would say excessively lengthy, intro that I had back in 2014. So that's all gone. So it's a fresh take on this interview. I conducted the interview April 1st, 2014 in the basement of Sokol Auditorium where St. Vincent was performing that night. Sokol Auditorium, of course, now known as the Admiral. This was one of my favorite interviews, and I'm glad to sort of repurpose it now with new photos and videos that I personally have shot of St. Vincent going back to 2009. I don't claim to be Annie Leibovitz or anything. My photos are not amazing. Video's pretty good, but just keep that in mind. There are many reasons why this interview is among my favorites. It's rare that I do an in-person interview. Back then, they used to always be done by phone, and nowadays, a lot of times it's Zoom, but rarely is it in person, at least for me. That part was cool, and also I was told to expect 10 minutes, maybe 20, depending on how it goes, and at 10, I saw the tour manager walking over, and I go, oh, do we need to wrap it up? And she waved him off, and then we spoke for another 10 minutes or so before we had to wrap up. So that was, I think that means it went well. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks a lot for watching.
Okay.
So I wanted to start off with a question about your new record label, because you switched labels between the last record and this record. I was wondering what prompted the change, and how do you think it's going so far?
What prompted the change was I made 3 records with 4AD. 4 if you count the one with David Byrne, which was co-released by 4AD, and Toto Mundo. And my contract was up, and I had a choice to continue or not, and I decided to go someplace else.
So it was just wanted to change. It wasn't like, for this next phase of my career, I need to do this or that.
No, it wasn't like deeply acrimonious or anything like that. It was just like, well, I'd like to see what else is out there, and see how other people work. And there was a really good team at Loma Vista. Actually, somebody from 4AD ended up going to a new label, and it just seemed like a really good fit, and they were excited, and I was excited, and so far it's gone really well.
Well, good.
Mm-hmm.
Is there? It's considered, 4AD is sort of still considered an indie, and this Loma Vista is now tied in with a major. There's not as much of a distinction these days as there used to be between things. Like 20 years ago, it was a big battle, are you supposed to be an indie or whatever. So anyways, is there additional pressure that you feel by being on a quote major label now, or have you felt any different in what their expectations are of you, or because it seems like you've been working your ass off for, not just now, but a long time, and every magazine cover you've been on, every major, you Google St. Vincent on YouTube, and you've done every interview show, so it's like you're definitely there.
Yeah.
Do you feel that extra pressure, or is it just like you've done this before and you're used to it at this point?
No, there's no additional pressure. I mean, except that pressure that I would just put on myself kind of naturally to succeed at life or art or whatever. There's not. I know what you mean. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was a big difference between a major label and an indie label. And it was a hard thing to kind of even, there's a chasm between them that was difficult to even navigate. But it's the wild, wild west. The music industry is super complicated and super in a free fall, and nobody's making making money off record sales. So and 4AD is Beggars, that whole system is a major label. I mean,
oh yeah.
They put out Adele, so it's not like the David and Goliath kind of idea that it just doesn't apply anymore.
That's kind of what I thought. So in sort of that is, speaking of that kind of dichotomy from back in the day where there used to be this big distinction, now is the word like rock star or pop star like a bad word to you or an embarrassing thing to you, or are you gonna, this is what is gonna happen, it could potentially happen? Is it a concept that sort of you are turned off by, because back in the day it was, again, this fear of success that a lot of indie artists sort of had, or a pretend fear of success of just saying, I don't want that, and then there's no way it'll actually happen.
No, I know what you mean. I mean, I think in this day and age, it's so hard to have any level of success. And I mean, it's so hard to like pay your bills as a musician that I think it's not a question anymore of like selling out. It's a question of survival.
Yeah.
And it is always sort of a strange thing. It doesn't happen anymore, but occasionally people will kind of use the term sellout, and it's like, well, the same people who aren't paying for your records are calling you a sellout for doing things that to monetize what you do.
Iggy Pop licensed his song to a TV commercial, and when he explained why he did it, I was like, okay, I'm over the whole concept of selling out now.
It's tricky. It's a tricky world. It's like,
And he said, look, I wrote the song Lust for Life 30 years ago. I know what it's about. It's not about selling a car. I'm comfortable with someone paying me to put it in a commercial. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I get that,
Yeah, it's a wild world. It really is.
I've read in articles that you learned a lot about performing or enhanced your performing style with your tour with David Byrne. Mm-hmm. But was wondering, did he change your approach to songwriting or add anything to it? Or did you guys collaborate, or did you each bring in your own songs?
We collaborated, but we really met in the middle. It wasn't the thing that makes David so exciting still as an artist and as a polymath is that he wants to see how other people work, and he's a real natural collaborator. So it wasn't this dichotomy of like teacher and student or that kind of thing. I mean that
you were at peer level. It wasn't like
it was peer level. I mean that doesn't give either one of us, I think, enough credit. But I certainly had so much fun with the Love This Giant tour because it was very theatrical, and it just seemed to me like no longer enough to just get up there and play some songs on a guitar. Like that's fine, but I think the kind of tip that I'm on right now is this idea that everything is performance once you walk on stage. So you can some people are performing authenticity, and they're wearing a flannel shirt and they have a beard and they're singing seemingly heartfelt songs, but they are just performing a version of authenticity, like a prohibition, Dust Bowl sort of version of American authenticity. And it's good, it's fine. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but we're all kind of essentially doing the same thing. So the fact that I'm acknowledging that this is all a performance is actually really liberating, because I'm going, okay, well, I'm aware that every detail is going to be looked at and interpreted some way. So why not be in control of those details as opposed to like, hey, I'm just walking on stage and being me.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what?
I wore these clothes all day.
Yeah,
no big
exactly.
deal.
It's like, you know what? Being you is not enough. Being you is fucking boring.
Yeah, this day and age, you got to be better than you.
Yeah.
Now you get compared to a lot of artists. A lot of articles always say the similar things. They say Kate Bush, etc. What's the one artist that you think you sort of resemble that nobody's ever pointed out, or that you were impacted by, that nobody has ever said, hey, you sound like this, or...
One thing I do think is interesting is that often, even though I think Kate Bush is wonderful.
Yeah.
But I don't really think I sound like Kate Bush.
No, and
at all. And
it's
that's
a reference that a lot of people don't know anymore. You know,
It's a
like
yeah,
the
exactly.
commercials for the concert, they said, you know, comparisons that were on the radio, said comparisons to Kate Bush. I'm like, you know what? The average 18-year-old doesn't remember Kate Bush.
No, God no.
You know, I mean, she hasn't performed in 35 years,
I
so
mean,
it's like,
the cool 18-year-olds know who Kate Bush
Sure,
is. Now,
right,
but,
right.
But I know what you mean. It's not a current reference. I mean, she still makes records, and I'm not saying she's not a current artist, but I mean, yeah, most kids don't know who that is. I don't, and I think I don't really sound like Kate Bush, and I think it's interesting. I've sort of been able to evade it to some degree, but definitely earlier on in my career, there was just always a comparison to another female artist that
Yeah.
I had, and a lot of times I had.
see, because I
nothing
always
to do
hear,
with
I hear
them.
Kate Bush, then I hear David Bowie, Talking Heads, two male artists, you
Sure,
know.
yeah.
So I didn't necessarily associate it in that way. I just thought it's sort of a strange reference. Like, I used to manage this pop group in the 90s that was really
band?
into Lindsey Buckingham. They were called the X Action Figures.
Uh-huh.
And they really loved Lindsey Buckingham. That was like their idol. Okay, well, in the 90s, or early 90s, 92, 93, in like indie magazines, they didn't want to hear you say you're like Lindsey Buckingham,
No,
you know?
yeah.
So it was like an odd reference that people didn't like. And it sort of turned them off, but it's like, that's what they're into, and isn't that sort of the independent spirit? Like, they can be influenced by Lindsey Buckingham the same way that you could by, you know, what's his name, Howard DeSoto or something like that.
Yeah,
from,
totally. You know, it's interesting. There's a canon of like cool bands. Like there's like, I'm not sure what it is, but every, say, 5 years, because the cycles are getting shorter because of the internet, every 5 years someone's like, you know what was an amazing band? Joy Division.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, Joy Division was an amazing band.
They were
But,
quite
like,
good, yes.
But they have this like, this permacool thing, and every 5 years someone's like, you know what, I'm going to sound exactly
just
like
kind of
Joy Division.
discover it, yeah.
And I mean, that's cool, because whatever, but there are other bands, like, nobody's ever, like a band that I love, like Steely Dan, nobody ever kind of comes around and is like, well, we're kind of doing a Steely Dan
Yeah.
thing. It's really, it's going to be huge, all the
Well, I
cool
told
kids
the
are gonna be
guy,
into it.
I don't know if you've ever heard the group Blinker the Star. It's a Canadian group. I told him that I thought their new album sounded like Steely Dan, and he was like, thank you, man. That is the best thing I've ever heard, you know, because he was getting these Flaming Lips comparisons and stuff that he didn't really think was appropriate.
Yeah.
And I said Steely Dan, and he was like, exactly. But nobody else seemed to really care about that. If you could be in any other band at any time, what group would that have been, and what would you play in that group?
Oh man. Every once in a while when I'm sound checking and for whatever reason not singing, I'm reminded how fun it is to just play guitar in a band and not be a front person.
So Angus Young, then.
Yeah, with the suspenders and the little.
The little short
Short
shorts
shorts.
and stuff, yeah.
You know what? I would be like Pat Smear.
There you go.
I'd fucking join Nirvana.
And you had the Germs, of course. Do we need to wrap it up? Okay.
I was thinking about your rock. Sorry, I'm eating raspberries.
No worry.
I was thinking about your rock star question.
Yeah.
And I know what you mean. Like in 1990 or 89 or whatever, the thing was so bloated. Like a rock star meant like being Poison or being
Right.
Axl Rose or something like that. And so then you had like Nirvana or somebody, Pearl Jam and stuff like that come along, who were people who.
And they felt guilty about
They
being
felt guilty
successful.
about it. Mhm.
Yeah. And I always thought that was so strange, but it was so true. Like I said, I used to manage bands, and I had a little label, and that was the time when there was this battle, and if you were connected in any way, shape, or form with some big label or some big thing, you were tainted.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter that all those artists, if they were really honest, wanted to play bigger places. They're not embarrassed of having money. They're not, whatever. They just, it was illegal to admit to that, basically.
Falling on basic rust.
was. Well, because I mean, I guess if you go back and look, like Sonic Youth, Jesus Lizard, Nirvana, they were at one time on major labels in the early '90s. But I think what that was the '90s were actually a time of prosperity, and there was a sense that like, well, you don't have to be a fucking gazillionaire. You can just like probably live maybe a comfortable like middle class life or something. You know, it wasn't like a choice between, you know, squalor and success.
There were so few like good rock stars at that point. In the 70s, it wasn't embarrassing. Neil Young was a rock star in the 70s.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing wrong with Neil Young. I mean, he's awesome, you know. And there were people that you even kind of crummy bands that you know, but they're still around or whatever. I'm not saying Van Halen's crummy, but they were like big rock stars or whatever, and it wasn't a bad thing. It's just it kind of turned negative at some point as the 80s got played out into the 90s, the new decade, etc. But it was so fierce, and I look back and I hated that time because I made a lot of terrible decisions based on that same mentality that if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't have made those same decisions.
Totally.
Because they were wrong at the time, you know?
Yeah, well, and times are tougher now, so I don't think people are as, like, afraid of success. Because just, like, kind of, like, pay my bills, like, get it done. But, you know, you brought up the 70s rock star thing, and it is interesting. I mean, there's, you know, bands like Zeppelin, big stadium bands who, I mean, I think Zeppelin's great.
Yeah.
The rhythm section especially, but there was that period in the late 70s when like the snake started eating its own tail, and you just started having all these songs about like being on the road.
Yeah.
And there are some songs from that, you know, era lexicon, like Hot Blooded, and who's that, like bands like Chicago and that.
Foreigner, Chicago Sticks, REO Speedwagon, Journey. Can you tell the difference between most of them?
All that shit I hate. I could
they're
never get
interchangeable
into that.
groups because you never knew who was in the band. There was no identity with like, oh, I really, you know, the guy I have up on my wall is the bass player for REO. It's like, no one does that, you know?
Yeah,
but
totally.
yet they sold more records than anyone that you put on your wall, you know?
Yeah, of course.
It was such a bizarre
But it's
time.
weird. It was weird aspirational music too. It was like, but it was just all songs about being on the road and like.
Yeah, nothing else. That's all you needed back then, I guess.
Girls, yeah.
Roll with the changes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Rambling, or just everybody's rambling. But that's like a whole that started to be, I think, like the dark zone of rock and roll, which led us into, you know, Poison and all that stuff.
What happened in the 80s, which is a dark period.
Yeah.
Since you've become a little bit famous in your own right, have you met anybody that you used to sort of idolize as a teenager, or were a fan of, maybe not idolize, that you've encountered, and maybe the encounter was really good or the encounter was really bad?
Well, I would never say it if the encounter was really bad. But,
Okay.
I will say I met Eddie Vedder.
Okay.
Who was a big part of my life. You know, Pearl Jam came out when I was 10.
Oh my gosh, I'm so
9?
much older than you then.
Yeah, you know, so that was like a big deal. And I got to thank him, which was, I was very emotional.
He's a nice guy. I've met him. He's a very nice guy.
He's a sweet guy. And Prince came to the show in New York. I didn't get to meet him because he kind of is.
It might not have been that good of an experience. He's one of those guys I would wonder whether he would be nice or not.
Well,
he might be.
He came with a friend of mine. So I think it would have been totally sweet and pleasant. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, well, I was just always curious about that because I had my one negative experience.
Oh, with who?
Paul Westerberg.
Oh, really?
I met him when I was 18. I was the editor of the high school newspaper, so I got to go backstage and like meet them. And I had this little 8x10, those little 8x10 glossy band photos. Okay, so I had the whole band sign it. And when I got to Westerberg, I approached him and I told him who I was and everything. And he sees the picture in my hand and he goes, "Where'd you get that?" And I'm like, "In the mail." And he grabs it out of my hand and he rips it into pieces.
Aww.
Okay, and throws it on the ground. And like everybody's looking like, holy shit, I can't believe that he just did that. So I'm like devastated, right? And I had all this other stuff to sign too, but I didn't want to give it to him anymore. And he's like, well, what else do you have? So I had this musician magazine with them on the cover. So then he grabs it from me, and then he signs it like 30 times. He keeps opening the page and signing it and opening the page and signing it. And then we started talking about stuff, and he was cool for like 10 minutes. But it was like, what the hell just happened? Like, why
Maybe it was
Why
a really
did you forget?
maybe it was a really unflattering picture. It's like, oh, I never want this to see the light of day.
Well, there were
With a
thousands
double
of them
chin.
out there. I don't know.
Oh no.
Well, okay, so I know we're probably got to wrap it up, so let me just ask you one thing. Since this is your 4th or 5th time in Omaha, I believe.
Yeah, is that right?
Let's see, I've seen you 4 times, so unless
No
you're here some other
way.
time, yeah.
I'm
Because it
so
was
sorry about the first 3.
no. You know what? I mean, this is gonna sound bad or whatever, but I saw you open for the National before you had the band and everything, and I went there thinking, okay, St. Vincent's cool. I'm here for the National.
Yeah.
I watched your set. I didn't even want to see the National after that. And I love the band.
No, I
I'm
love
just
them
like,
too.
you know what I
That's
mean?
sweet,
But
though.
it was so different, and it was just so like exciting for me because it's something I wasn't expecting. That just 4 guys being kind of sad and stuff just wasn't. I mean, ordinarily that would have worked for me, but it wasn't going to work for me that night. You know.
Oh, well, I'm glad you enjoyed that show. I remember that tour because I wanted to have like some sort of like a light show, but I didn't have any money and anything, so I like went and I like welded this crazy light thing together. It was like kind of cornball LED like light thing. The LED things were from Guitar Center, and it was like reacted to sound. And I remember that took like an hour and a half to set up. Like
Wow.
I could barely sound check because I was setting up this stupid light thing.
See, I just remember just being so impressed with how different it was, and the balls it would take. No offense, to like step on stage by yourself, because that would be petrifying to me.
Yeah.
To just do it with nobody else there, and to have all those pedals and all the gear and all this. I ended up being like, wow, I can't watch just a regular band right now. I think I need to go home and do something else.
Awesome. Well, thanks.
Well, okay, I'll end it there because I know you got to go, but I want to do the ultimate corny thing.
Tell me.
Okay, I want to know if you could sign a record for me.
Yeah.
Okay. Generally, I don't like to do that during interviews, but I don't know if I'll get another chance.
Sure. Do you have a Sharpie?
I do. I'm prepared, Amy.
Oh, Tom Carlson has a Sharpie.
Ooh. Maybe yours is better than mine.
Have you ever really listened to the lyrics of Hot Blooded? I mean, it's totally horrifying.
You know what would be
Like-
more horrifying is if you actually went and saw Foreigner today with
Yeah.
no original members, and the bass player from Dokken is the bass
No.
player for Foreigner, and he does all his heavy metal moves like he was in. I was watching this on the Palladium channel the other day, and they got a singer who sounds just like Lou Gramm,
Yeah.
and then
Where are the original members? Did they?
oh, I don't know. I mean, who knows what
their
happened?
money from Hot Blooded.
Oh, let me take- I'll take
Hot
it.
Blooded.
I think just one guy wrote all those songs, anyways.
Oh, really?
I believe. I mean, I can't remember his
I
name.
don't know anything about Foreigner.
You know, that's the funny thing about America. It's like somebody whose like grandfather made Tootsie Rolls is like will never have to work a day in his life. Like it's a really bizarre.
Mike Nesmith
Please.
from the Monkees. His mom invented Whiteout.
Really?
And
Yeah.
he was one of the first investors in Beta and made a ton of money.
I knew he was in video production. I didn't know about the Beta thing.
I heard he's a really nice guy, though.
Yep. He made some cool country records.
Yeah.
First
Wait,
national band record.
will you spell your name?